Welcome to the AI Energy and Climate Podcast, a special series from the DSR Network hosted by David Sandalow.
Hi, I'm David Sandalow, and this is the AI Energy and Climate Podcast. On April 10th, the International Energy Agency in Paris released a major report on energy and AI. The report has more than 300 pages and dives deeply into a range of topics, including electricity demand for AI, how AI is being used in the energy sector, AI's role in accelerating energy innovation, security implications of AI, greenhouse gas emissions from AI, and more. The report was designed and directed by Laura Cozzi, who is Director of Sustainability, Technology, and Outlooks at the IEA. And we are very fortunate to have her with us here today to discuss the report. Ms. Cozzi joined the IEA as a junior analyst in 1999, and since then she's co-led many editions of the IEA's flagship World Energy Outlook. She's led multiple special reports such as this one. Laura holds 2 master's degrees, one in environmental engineering, another in energy and environmental economics, and she was recently awarded the highest ranking Order of Merit by the Italian Republic. Laura, welcome to the AI Energy and Climate Podcast. And first question, how do you pronounce the name of that award you received in Italian?
Hi, David. It's wonderful to be with you here today. Thank you for having me. Thank you for having the IEA this podcast. So yes, I received this honor from the Italian government. It's actually called Cavaliere, which means knight, actually. So it's a very interesting name. Yes. Dave, I think the equivalent would be signora, but I don't know. They call Cavaliere, so it's the same. There is no differentiation in Italian between male and female. It's the same.
Well, congratulations on that, and also congratulations on this big report that I mentioned. And it was obviously a major piece of work with a huge team that you led and directed there. And it's mainly what we want to talk about today. So maybe just to start, what were your goals? What were the IEA's goals with this report?
David, you're very aware of what we were trying to do. As I said very upfront, we are very, very grateful for all the contribution you personally made. And in particular, you were with us at the major conference we hosted here in Paris in December. But basically, very simply put, last year, so in 2024, every energy conference around the world was always about artificial intelligence. And to be quite frank, with very little data, a lot of anecdotes here and there. So we felt that we needed to put a bit of facts and figures on a topic that is clearly becoming very, very important, but it was lacking a bit of the scientific aspect to it. So our aim was putting clarity and facts on this very important interaction between the very fast increasing AI sector and data centers and the energy sector.
So clarity and facts. So maybe could you share with us just some of the headline facts that you set forth in this report?
Yeah, first of all, I think there was even very little clarity and understanding of how much electricity data centers were using today. And we did quite a huge amount of work just to understand that quite simple thing. And what we found is it's around 400 terawatt hours, which, just to give a sense, globally is around 1.5% of global electricity demand. What we wanted to understand was how fast it has been growing, and it will be growing. So the second thing we found quite interesting is that since 2017, electricity demand related to data centers has been growing 4 times faster than global electricity demand. So it's actually picking up relatively quickly. And what we have found is that in our base case to 2030, we are expecting that this is going to accelerate even further. So you're going to have data center driven electricity demand that is going to be growing even faster than electricity demand, and accounting for around 10% of growth in electricity demand from now to 2030, which is significant, but is not huge. So depending on where you are in the world, this share will be bigger. And I think in the US is actually one of the key areas of the world where we are seeing this being even more significant, because we are expecting to see around 50% of electricity demand from now to 2030 in the United States to be led by AI. So this is the first group of findings were all related to how much electricity today, how much electricity in the future. The second is what kind of sources will we need to produce this electricity. So we worked very, very closely with the tech companies, with the utilities around the world to understand what were the expectations, what were the strategies, in which areas of the world you have congestion. And what we find is actually that you're going to see a lot of new sources being used. But renewables with storage and grid are actually the fastest growing for a number of reasons, because they are quicker than others to be deployed, and data centers are built very quickly. So the availability of very quickly new electricity is going to be a very, very, very important factor. The second is going to be natural gas, but we're also seeing a lot of new dispatchable sources in the longer term. So being geothermal, being nuclear, being a host of new technologies. So a variety of sources that will help produce this additional electricity. And the third point, I think, is really about the interaction between the tech sector and the energy sector. So the two worlds are quite different and don't talk to each other very much. So I think there is a cultural issues happening. I think one number that strikes me particularly, you need very little time to build new data centers, and the IT sector is very, very quick, very dynamic. So you build data centers in a matter of months, up to a year and a half. The energy sector, in particular, when you talk about infrastructure and grids, these are multi-year projects, and sometimes they take 8-10 years to materialize. So you are putting together two titans. One is very fast and the other is a bit slower. So you need to make sure that actually the timing align. So I think one important point for us was to highlight that when you look at all the project pipeline, the realistic project pipeline of data centers from now to 2030, and when you analyze, as we have done, every single grid spot where these data centers are going to be realized, around a fifth of these new data centers may be at risk of not having enough electricity. So we are really encouraging the two sectors with governments to sit around the table and talk, because there are ways to actually make sure that the energy is going to be there, but it's urgent that there are tables to sit and talk and discuss how do we speed up these processes.
I thought your report really shed light on some important issues, and there's been a bit of a paradox, I think, in some people's mind, because when you look at the amount of electricity that's actually being used for data centers globally, it's actually not that large. I think you found 1.5% of global electricity is going to data centers, but there's no doubt that more than 1.5% of the attention in this topic of kind of electricity demand is going to data centers. In fact, as you said, it's kind of the major topic everybody's talking about. So why is that? Why is it that if it's only 1.5% of demand, it's getting all this attention? And your statistic about the growth in the U.S., I think, helps to shed light on that. You project that 50% of the growth in electricity demand in the United States is going to be related to data centers. So that's obviously enormous. And then at least a fifth of data centers, you say, I think this is a global figure, may not have enough power as they're built. So it's this sector is stressing electricity grids, and I think that's why it's getting so much attention. But it's sometimes lost that actually, despite that, it's not a huge percentage of global electricity demand by any means. In fact, I think the IEA has found that electricity demand for air conditioning and other sources is going to be much larger in the years ahead. Is that right?
Yeah, you're completely right. But I think, David, you underlined one very important characteristic that differentiates data centers vis-a-vis other type of loads. So data centers are loads that are comparable to energy-intensive industries. So an aluminum smelter or other type of very, very energy intensive demand centers. But it tends to be much more concentrated and clustered than these other types of demand centers. So that's why, from the energy sector perspective, having these new loads that are very close to urban centers, much closer than all other type of energy intensive sector, that are built so quickly, and in some cases on grids that are already congested, creates buzz and a bit of tension in a way.
You had an interesting section in your report about one trend that may move in the other direction there, which is the movement of compute to edge devices.
Yeah.
Say a word about what you found there, because I thought that was particularly interesting.
So we have looked at this quite in detail, and as you said, there is an entire section in the report there, and basically would mean that you start using and handle the AI models on your computer or on your smartphones, and what we find is that currently technology is going very quickly, but without making names, but leading smartphones today could handle within 1 billion parameters in AI model. We find up to basically 10 billion. But to give a sense of scale, a large language model, typical large language model that we may use in our usual application, can actually is using hundreds of billions of parameters. So we are not necessarily quite there yet in terms of the technology. There will be certain applications, I have in mind autonomous driving, where you need the latency, so you will certainly need it on the edge device, but it's going to be a bit of a mixed patch where some of the applications will still be handled in large data centers. Some will be on the edge. In our main scenario, we really see a bit of this moving forward, but we are not really expecting within the next 5 years that everything will be moved to our mobile phones to make it a bit simple, simply because the amount of parameters that need to be dealt, we don't have yet the chips that would allow that. It may happen with everything that is happening so quickly, but it's not our base case today.
And just a couple of questions to follow up on what you were saying about the sources of electricity and where that's going to come from. One question is on nuclear, and there's been some discussion obviously about the potential for nuclear to provide this type of low carbon power in large amounts. What did you find on nuclear power?
So actually, we find that some of the tech companies have actually started to procure and entered in agreements with nuclear provider, for example, SMRs. This is the case in the United States, but we also find in other countries like Japan is very, very interested in providing this type of 24/7 more reliable power to data centers. So very much depending on in which country you are, but certainly it's emerging as one of the technologies, as it matches the quality of the electricity that data centers need. Is also once it is built, the prices tend to be relatively stable, so you don't have fluctuations of prices. It's low emission, so there are a lot of the qualities that are needed. Of course, there is another point, is that if you don't have the power plant yet, it may take some time. So it's not about the quickness of having it ready immediately, which is in some cases what some of the companies are looking for. But it's certainly part of the solution in many parts of the world.
We had an interesting conversation on these topics at our Global Energy Summit at Columbia University last week, and it's interesting. This conversation was more focused on the United States, but one speaker talked about the potential for restarting nuclear plants or increasing the productivity of existing nuclear plants, and thought there's at least a couple of gigawatts of potential, not a huge amount, but a couple of gigawatts of potential in the United States in the short term on that. But then beyond that, the optimists that I've heard talk about small modular reactors are talking about the 2030s.
30s, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
It won't happen until so it might be a source of power in the next decade, but probably not in this decade.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're fully aligned there. All our analysis would point in that direction too. Yeah.
And then how about the renewables and natural gas? You mentioned that, but sometimes those are kind of cast in opposition to each other, but I think you found that renewables and storage can move very quickly. You just said that
Yeah.
in many situations. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think there are a few points to highlight there. First, we looked at the corporate strategies, and a lot of the corporate strategies are actually really directed towards renewables and storage, hybrid renewables. So you have a combination of solar, wind, and storage, which complement each other in different times of the day, etc. We are actually seeing renewables and storage with a combination of grid to be the most common type of purchasing power agreement that is out there. So it's really the preferred option by many IT companies. We did, in addition to discussing with the companies, a lot of analysis to understand whether actually, because the big question is, do you get the type of electricity you want? Because data centers have requirements of very, very high quality electricity, and what is the cost of that? So we assessed over 1,000 different use cases around the world, a lot of them in the United States. So different places in the world, different resources availability, different grid connections. And what we find is actually you can go to a very high share of variable renewables and storage, and get the price that you would get from the grid before actually then needing to access other sources. So you would still get very reliable electricity. You're talking about something between 50 and 80% of variable renewables, and then you would need to go to the grid, and at cost it would be similar to what you would get on the wholesale electricity price. It's never only renewables. It's always going to be renewables plus others, and the share, of course, depends on the location. But it can take us quite a long way.
Kind of leads naturally to questions about greenhouse gas emissions from AI and the greenhouse gas implications. So say a word about what you found in the report on that topic.
So I think that this was one of the key areas that was actually discussed quite a lot, with very little clarity on how much emissions. And what we find, again, in our base case, we find emissions rising by around 300 million tons. Just for everyone, so maybe not familiar with how much emissions there are in the world today, but we are around 32 gigatons. So 300 million tons over 32 gigatons. In the case where we examine what we call a lift-off, meaning that we have a lot of demand for AI, and the energy sector would need to rely more on fossil fuels to supply this electricity demand. The incremental emissions would be, so if you want the worst case for emissions, is 500 million tons. So I think we need to nuance. Is it going to make or break climate change? No. We are talking about a much larger amount of emissions that need to be tackled. But yes, it's true that is one of the sectors that is going to increase in a significant matter. So attentions need to be taken. Personally, what I found most interesting, and with very little literature out there, is the potential of AI to be used in the energy sector to reduce emissions. And what we find is that is much, much larger than the actual direct emissions. So I think there is scope to have a much more balanced conversation and look at the two sides of the equation.
Well, that couple of comments there. So first, 500 million tons is, I guess that's about 1% of total greenhouse gas emissions.
Yes.
Yeah, and 1.5%, a little bit less, of CO2 emissions in the world.
Yeah, that's correct.
So and that's the direct impacts. And that's in your liftoff case. So that's in the scenario in which AI grows the most, right?
Absolutely.
So is it right to think about that as roughly an upper bound, basically? Yeah. And then your conclusion about the potential for AI to reduce emissions is very consistent with the conclusion of a big report that we did, the AI for Climate Change Mitigation Roadmap, where we looked at 8 different sectors and found very significant potential and for AI to reduce emissions. Your report goes further than other reports I've seen, including ours, on trying to quantify that. And you have some specific efforts to try to quantify the potential in 2030, 2035. So I thought that was very interesting. And I commend listeners to take a look at that because it's some really good work there.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And I think not much documented. And again, I think one of our key objectives here is to put forward data-driven analysis and facts. So we're going to put forward an observatory that is going to just very plainly tell for the energy sector what are the possible use cases for AI, so that companies can actually think it through and maybe use it. And I think we'll leave it to the listeners here, but for example, for the transport sector, just optimization of traffic routes would be the equivalent of savings of taking off 120 million vehicles from the streets. This is just a huge amount, just pure optimization that not only cuts emissions, but also cuts costs. So this is the type of use cases that we have gone through across all end uses, across production, across transmission. So really try to document in a very factual way what could be those use cases.
Well, a couple of other topics. Your report is really wide-ranging, and one topic you talk about is north-south issues and digital divide. And can you say a word about the IEA's thinking on that topic?
Yeah, maybe just we start again. What's the situation today? And the situation today is that if there are basically three regions of the world, the US is around 45% of energy-related use of data centers, but it's also a reflection of how many data centers there are in the US. And if you take the US, Europe, and China, is more than 85% of the overall data centers in the world. And if you look at the emerging countries and developing economies, they currently have around 50% of global internet traffics, but only 10% of data centers. So you just have a few where you're starting having real investments. One example is Malaysia, the UAE, some spots in some regions in India, Gujarat, for example, etc. But otherwise, it remains very much a very concentrated issue in three areas of the world, and very clearly emerging markets and developing economies are lagging behind here. Sometimes the fact that the grid itself and the energy sector is not necessarily as reliable plays a role.
Well, there's lots more in this report, and I commend it to listeners and lots of detail and some other topics that we haven't had time to get to. But just to start to close up, what comes next for the IEA on this topic, on AI energy? What do you think you're doing?
So there are a few things that we're doing, but certainly we are working very hard to put forward this AI and energy observatory, where we want to do two things. First is really increasing the transparency of data. So all data about data centers' use of energy by region, by sector, by type of data centers, we will put it out there in terms of databases, this hopefully very, very soon. But we also want to tell the other stories we just mentioned. So what are the AI applications that the energy sector can do? Particularly, I find that we have just started scratch the surface of innovation, using AI for innovation in the energy sector. Very exciting. I mean, I'm sure that you've covered this, David, in your previous podcast, but AI applications have made 2 Nobel Prizes last year. If you look at how much money on AI for innovation is much, much smaller than other areas of the economy. They're just at 2%, when life science is 4 times larger than that. So maybe taking the example of new solar material, we have just explored 0.01% of what those materials could be, and certainly AI could really accelerate that. So we're going to start looking a bit more on the innovation side of things as well.
Well, and I thought that was a fascinating section of your report. You compare patents in different sectors
Yes,
related to AI, and the energy sector actually has a much, as you just
smaller.
suggested,
Yeah,
a much smaller percentage of patents related to AI
yeah,
than pharmaceuticals and some other sectors.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I
So
wonder
that
if that will change in the years ahead. Uh, Laura, we're closing this podcast
yes.
with two questions for every guest, and the first one is, how are you using AI in your day-to-day life?
So I will not say that because I have two teenagers at home, and my son started to show me all the AI applications several years ago, but I don't think I am allowed to say for what they are used at home. But maybe I will say that I've been one of the proponents of the use of AI here at the IEA. So very proud that actually this report is coming out with an AI agent. So we are actually trying to aid our readers to access our analysis in a much more interactive way. So I would certainly recommend the listeners here to go and not only explore the report, but maybe try to use also the AI agent that comes with the report.
Yeah, I think it's really great. It's a great tool, and you can query the report and other
Yeah.
IEA reports using the chatbot, and it's
Yes.
much more sophisticated than the keyword search that we've been familiar with for the past
Yes.
decade or so. Uh, and then our final question is to please recommend 3 books, reports, or articles that could be on any topic, kind of classic from your childhood if you like, or something you read yesterday.
So I'm gonna, as you have said from the beginning, I'm Italian, and of course I'm a lady. So I've decided to give all ladies literature, so or related
Wonderful.
to my life in a way or another. So one is called My Brilliant Friend by a current, by a living writer, which is called Elena Ferrante, and it talks about female friendship and life. So I would certainly recommend that if you haven't read it. The second is something that I actually used to read to my daughter, who's, as I said earlier, is a teenager now, but I used to read it, is Good Night Stories for Rebel Girls. Again, an Italian writer, Francesca Cavallo, and I would certainly recommend it to mothers that want to stimulate their daughters into including STEMs. So I certainly recommend this one.
Say again the title, Laura.
The title is Good Night Stories for Rebel Girls.
Thank you.
And it actually is about the tales of 100 what she calls extraordinary women. So they're all real life stories. So to bring to our daughters and sons. And finally, I want to tell you something about poetry because I'm a big fan of poetry. So I would certainly recommend reading Nobel Prize winner Polish Szymborska, Nothing Twice.
Laura Cozzi, what wonderful recommendations. I can't wait to dig into all of them, and what a tremendous report. So thank you. Thank you so much for joining us on the AI Energy and Climate podcast.
Thank you, David. Lovely to be here.